Yeah. And hopefully it should come up. Just waiting to see that it is broadcasting first.
I'm just trying to get it loaded up on the screen.
Yep, we're on the screen, so.
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Throwing Away Logic. It's the 17th of May. I have lost all track of the dates with the events of the last few weeks in the UK with the election, but we'll quickly get into this. As you can see, if you've got a question tonight, the Skype details are down below on the screen. And just quickly introduce my quite depleted panel tonight. Zilla, how are you doing?
Oh, good. Yourself?
Yes, I'm doing very well. Just to quickly say, as you can see, the topic today is the upcoming marriage equality referendum, and we'll probably branch into a few other topics today. So welcome him back. He's been on the show a good few times, the chair of Atheist Ireland, written the hit play I, Kino, if I'm recalling this correctly. Kitch knows all of this stuff a lot better, but welcome him back, and always a pleasure to have you, Michael Nugent.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you back. So I think we'll just get into the main topic that probably everyone's going to be want to hear about is the marriage equality referendum. So can you give us a bit of a background to how things got to the way they are right now in Ireland?
Well, essentially, 30 years ago in Ireland, there was a man beaten to death in Fairview Park in Dublin for being gay by a group of people who openly said that they were queer bashing. And they received a suspended sentence after being found guilty, and they had a victory march back to Fairview from the court. It was an outrageous situation. And that triggered off a series of what were initially protest marches by the gay community in Ireland, which eventually sort of morphed into the current pride parades and a very strong lobby campaign by the gay community and indeed by people in the wider community for equality for gay people in Ireland. The main stepping stone to where we are now was the legalization of homosexuality, which was illegal until the early 1990s, when Senator David Norris took a court case to the European Court of Human Rights and forced the Irish government to change the law on that. And we've now astonishingly, in the space of 30 years, which is a relatively short period of time, in the overall evolution of a state, we're now reaching a state where we're on the verge of having marriage equality, regardless of the sex of the married couple, which may come about next week if things go right. It's looking relatively positive, but who knows in terms of the turnout on the day. Conservative voters in Ireland typically turn out in greater numbers proportionally than Liberal voters. So I'm certainly not taking anything for granted, but we're on the verge of a really significant change in how Ireland deals with the equality for gay and lesbian people.
Yeah, because we just had it passed in Scotland this year, and it's been quite interesting seeing the campaigns here. The No campaign, it's always quite interesting to hear what here they seem to focus more. It was just the redefinition of marriage, where I've seemed to notice in Ireland it's the family and the children. That's the angle the No campaign seem to be going for a lot of the time. I think you've said it yourself. They seem to be more. It seems to be a referendum on surrogacy for them, but not actually marriage.
Yeah. Now the positive side of that is that they don't feel comfortable in being as overtly homophobic as they might have been 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Back then, a campaign, if we had had one at that stage, would have been conducted by the No side on the basis of this is unnatural and this is against Catholic teaching. They're not comfortable making those overtly homophobic arguments now, so they are kind of reduced to scrabbling around at the bottom of the barrel for these strange arguments like surrogacy, adoption, which are nothing to do with the referendum. If this referendum is passed, all that will happen is the two people of the opposite sex or of the same sex will be able to marry each other. Any other laws about who can marry who will continue to be set out in legislation, and anything to do with adoption or surrogacy, which you know are the same for married couples or unmarried couples, for same-sex couples, for heterosexual couples, will still be the same. They won't be affected one way or another by this referendum.
Yeah, Zilla, do you have anything to ask?
Yeah, just right back at the start, you were talking about the incident 30 years ago, and you were talking about homosexuality and the law. Now, just to clarify, was it that homosexual acts were illegal up until then, or was it that homosexuality itself was illegal? Was it illegal to even just be homosexual?
Well, it was homosexual acts. I mean, in practical terms, I'm sure they would have liked to make homosexuality itself illegal, but in practice, you can't police people's desires or thoughts. But homosexual acts were illegal.
So, does that mean that sodomy itself was illegal, which also would have had ramifications for heterosexual couples who practiced it?
To be honest, I'm not sure about that, what the situation was then about that. I know that David Norris's case, where he took the case on the basis of his right to private and family life, and that the state shouldn't be interfering in his private life. So that to a certain extent, that wouldn't depend on the sexuality of the people involved in terms of private life.
All right. Yeah, I just always find it quite interesting how they try and introduce these laws, you know, against the homosexual community, and what implications they end up having for everybody else as well.
Well, I was out yesterday, or not yesterday, I was out on a couple of days ago in town with some people from the socialist campaign, who I met on the street, who were campaigning for the referendum. And as we were chatting, a woman came up opposing the referendum on the basis of anal sex being unhygienic. And when we pointed out to her that heterosexual couples also have anal sex, she just didn't seem that this didn't seem to register with it at all as a possibility. And she kind of entertainingly enough, she ended up literally in a variation of the no, I'm not listening to you, started just chanting at us, the anus is for pooping. The anus is for pooping, and she kind of got into quite a rhythm with this, and we realized before she did that there were other people just walking by on the street that didn't realize she was having a conversation with us about the referendum, and all that they saw was this lady standing there chanting, the anus is for pooping, the anus is for pooping. So it's a kind of entertaining country for a referenda.
That does sound a little bit like the I don't know if it's apocryphal or real, but the story with Queen Victoria, who had lesbianism explained to her and just decided that lesbian sex couldn't happen, so therefore lesbianism didn't exist. Yeah, I know, and even in the I mean, the Christian Bible seems to not to focus on lesbian sex either. But there's a great quote actually by David Norris. It's one of my favourite quotes from Irish politics, which is in the David Norris, for context, was the first openly gay member of the Irish legislature, a senator, an independent senator in Trinity College, or elected by the Trinity College constituency, and in the early 1990s, when the Catholic Church made one of their frequent statements to the effect that it's okay to discriminate against gay people in certain circumstances. And Archbishop Desmond Connell, who was at the time the Archbishop of Dublin, quite a conservative Catholic, agreed with this and endorsed that statement. And the media asked David Norris for a response to Archbishop Connell's statement that it's okay to discriminate against gay people. And to put David's comment in context, Archbishop Connell wrote his doctoral thesis partly on angels, which will give you an impression of the type of person that he is. And David's response was, well, this shows that Archbishop Connell may know a lot about angels, but he knows feck all about fairies. That's a wonderful quote.
And we can welcome Kitch to the show.
Hi guys, sorry I'm late. I got roped into chauffeur duties at the last second.
Yep. So I think, well, seeing as you're the newcomer, we can really put you on the spot. Have you got a question for Mick?
Yeah, sure. I don't know what's been asked so far, so sorry if this is actually a repeat question. But What's the feeling in Ireland about the about the gay marriage? Is there any generational divide? Is there any regional divide?
Yeah, it's kind of what you'd expect. The urban areas and younger voters are more strongly supportive. There's a reasonable spread across political parties. Most of, like all the major political parties are supporting it. Now, that's not always a good thing in Ireland, because you'll get people who, for some reason, want to give the political parties a kicking, and hopefully won't choose this as their way of doing it. I think that the yes vote, which in the polls has been up around the sort of 70-75%, was down to 53% in the most recent poll, which is a significant drop, but it's still that's still taking don't knows. That's still without taking the don't knows into consideration. So it's 53, and I think 25 for no, and the rest are undecided. So it would still take quite a shift in support of the no vote for the referendum to be defeated, if you're just looking at the number of people that are supporting or opposing it. However, as in all elections and referenda, the big issue is who will physically come out on the day to vote. And unfortunately, in Ireland, there is a tendency for Conservative voters to come out in greater numbers than Liberal voters. So as I said earlier before you come on, I'm certainly not taking anything for granted, and I think it's going to take quite a lot of both canvassing in the last week, but also, more importantly, just encouraging people to physically come out and vote.
It's a very bizarre debate so far that's been going on. One side seems to be arguing for marriage equality, and the other side is just made up a debate and arguing that. I've heard arguments about surrogacy, adoption, all these different debate topics from the no side, but without actually addressing the gay marriage, or very little.
Yeah, and I mean, the Referendum Commission has made clear, that these issues are not relevant to the to the referendum, and that all of these issues like surrogacy and adoption, they're dealt with by legislation. They address gay couples and heterosexual couples equally in any case, and there is a new bill put through the door recently about family status and protecting children, which deals with all these issues in the best interest of the child, independently of whether the family concerned have gay couple or a heterosexual couple involved in it. So these are distractions, but as I was saying earlier before you came on, I think it's ironically in some ways a positive step that these distractions are being raised, because it shows that people are not as comfortable as being overtly homophobic and religious about their arguments as they might have been 30 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, sorry. Kind of had to do a blank there. Yeah, even the on prime time, I can't remember who it was. He was in charge of the adoption services. Am I quite right? Came out and said that the marriage equality bill will not affect the adoption process whatsoever, and immediately the no side had just pretty much rubbished what he was saying without taking it into consideration, without even rubbishing what the child charities are saying, the children's charities are saying, without even taking a moment to consider, wait a minute, I might be wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want to be confused by facts, and they don't want other people to be confused by facts. I mean, look, the gist of it is, if the referendum is passed, the only change that there will be is that two people can get married regardless of their sex. Any other laws about who can marry who will continue to be set out in legislation. The constitutional status of marriage won't be changed at all. A marriage between two gay people will have the same status under the Constitution as a marriage between two heterosexual people, and married couples of any gender will be recognised as a family and will be entitled to the constitutional protection for families. Currently, although there are some protections laid out in the under civil partnership for gay couples, those protections aren't constitutionally protected, and this would put all families on the same constitutional footing.
So I just want to come in with one question there.
Sure.
Something I've heard a lot is a lot of the notes I say, well, you've got the civil unions. Why do you want marriage? You know, it's just the same things. So is there a difference in the definition? I've never really, you know, I've always backed equal, but what is the actual difference between a civil union and a...
Yeah, well, they say that as if, I had one person saying it when I was canvassing, saying, yes, already have civil partnerships. And so I asked them, well, would you be happy with a civil partnership instead of a marriage? And they immediately went, oh, well, that's not the point. But well, civil partnership, there's a few things about civil partnership. First of all, you can't be in a civil partnership if you're heterosexual. It has to be two people of the same sex. And then the other rules about civil partnership are they're not exactly the same as marriage. They're pretty similar. You have to be 18 or over. You can apply to the court to marry if you're under 18, but you can't if you want a civil partnership. You have to be 18. It's the same for civil partnerships. You can't be married or in an existing civil partnership. There's all the usual restrictions of types of, you know, people close to you and genetically that you can't marry, and you have to satisfy various notification requirements. So the registration is pretty similar. The main difference is that it's not constitutionally protected. So whatever protections are given in civil partnership can be taken away by the legislature, whereas the protections that are given to marriage are protected constitutionally. And so if this referendum is passed, then all of them will be on the same level.
Yeah, and what I also find funny enough, although a small, kind of very small difference though, is to be able to vote in this referendum, you can bring your marriage cert to be identified, but you can't bring your civil marriage cert.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly not seen as being on the same status. I mean, and there's also, like, independently of technical differences, there's just the psychological difference of not running an apartheid state and of treating everybody on the same basis. I mean, this whole separate but equal argument was played out in the USA in terms of you know, white citizens and black citizens, and it didn't really work out very well. And equally, there's no reason why we should have a different regime in Ireland for gay citizens as we have for heterosexual citizens.
Okay, Kitch, we got a question from the chat room there. We'll let you do it because you turned up late.
Sure. Question from Spencer Files, chair of the Scottish Secular Society. Michael, over in Scotland, our independence referendum galvanised the nation. It unified otherwise inert demographics. Do you expect this to happen in Ireland, irrespective of outcome?
Do you mean in terms of the referendum?
Yes,
It's no. We'll continue to be a divided country in terms of what are traditionally called, in the great euphemism in Ireland, is moral issues. Anything to do with sex in Ireland in political terms is called a moral issue, on which politicians say you have to have a free vote on moral issues, abortion, divorce, homosexuality, even condoms. They don't seem to think that, you know, how you deal with the unemployed or poverty is a moral issue. You know, they seem to be restricted to these issues. So we'll still have that difference here. What is happening already, regardless of the referendum, is that it is becoming less acceptable to overtly discriminate against gay people, and I think that's why the no side is finding it so difficult to get traction on this and are having to resort to these distraction issues. It's the same. There's a thing. This is if we go into America for something that I think is quite interesting as a pattern, which could well apply in other countries as well. There's a question in opinion polls in America, which is done every decade or so, which is would you vote for an otherwise well qualified candidate for president, nominated by your own party if they happen to be, and then there's a list of options, you know, gay, female, black, atheist, etc. And currently the most recent poll in that atheists are at about 50%. That half of Americans wouldn't vote for an otherwise well-qualified candidate nominated by their own party if they happen to be an atheist. But that 50% sort of halfway mark is where gay candidates were in the 1980s in America, at the height of the AIDS epidemic. It's where black candidates were in the 1960s during the civil rights movement, and it's where female candidates were in the 40s when they were supposedly taking men's jobs, after the war. Now, all of those categories of people have been showing increases in the number of people that are prepared to vote for them in America, and the trends are kind of following a decade or so behind each other, and so gay candidates and atheist candidates are still below women candidates, black candidates. But I think that those patterns of changing are happening around the world anyway, as secularism takes hold, certainly in the developed world and in democratic countries. So I think regardless of the referendum, that's the direction that Ireland is moving in. Now, there's still quite a kickback against that, because what tends to happen when you do have moves towards secularism is you will get some people retreating into the sort of more fundamentalist approaches, and we're having that as well. We have it's probably best reflected in here by all of these once-off groups that seem to emerge, Family and Life, and the ongoing one of organisations like the Iona Institute. Like there is in the last decade or so a stronger overt opposition to more liberal and tolerant and compassionate approaches to running society. But I think that they are emerging out of their fear that things are moving in the wrong direction from their perspective, and so I'm actually quite optimistic because of that.
And what do you think of the Church's threat to, if the referendum is passed, to no longer perform the civil marriage part of the marriage ceremony? Is that an empty threat, do you think? And
it's
it's to their detriment if they do actually carry out with that?
Well, I hope it's not an empty threat. I hope they do carry it out. I'll be delighted if they carry it out. Essentially, what they're saying is that if the referendum is passed, then the definition of state marriage will be so different to the definition of church marriage that they would be unable to register the state marriages as part of their church ceremonies. Typically, what happens is that they would register a marriage at the end of the service. And while they're registering the marriage, they're acting on behalf of the state. While they're doing the rest of the service, they're acting on behalf of the church. Now, it's quite interesting that they're making that threat now, given that they didn't make it or carry it out when the divorce referendum was passed. Because in principle, the divorce referendum made an even more significant change to the difference between the church definition of marriage and the state definition of marriage, in that the church definition of marriage is that it's for life. And you can't have a divorce, and would also, in principle, you would imagine divorce would have a greater impact on children, which is another the concerns that they claim to be expressing, than would marriage equality. So they didn't carry out that threat with regard to divorce, yet they are threatening it when it comes to marriage equality. So there's obviously something to do with same-sex marriages that is the step too far for them, and maybe that's an example of the mask slipping with regards to their underlying concerns about gay marriage. But I would be delighted if they carried out that threat. I think it would be very useful to formally separate the church and state elements of marriage rather than merge them together in a confusing way.
I wanted to ask, because you'll probably remember, are you seeing parallels between this referendum and the divorce referendum?
It's tricky. There were two divorce referendums. First divorce referendum in the 1980s was defeated. The second one in the 1990s was carried, but very, very narrowly. It was only carried by less than 1% of the vote. And I remember the early divorce referendums. I remember putting up posters on lampposts, and a child coming over to me and telling me that her mother had told her that I would go to hell for putting up those posters. So it was the bigotry was much more overt back then than it is now. I remember when the first divorce referendum was defeated, Martin Turner, who's the cartoonist with the Irish Times, had a very good cartoon. titled this. To put this in context, it was around the time of the Anglo-Irish Agreement negotiations and the Ulster Unionist campaign against the Anglo-Irish Agreement negotiations in the 80s, and Martin Turner did a cartoon of titled "United Ireland at Last" of a kind of an Ulster Unionist character and a Paddy Irish character, with their arms around each other, smiling into camera, so to speak, from the cartoon. And the Ulster Unionist character had a big rosette on him saying, "Ulster says no." And the Paddy character had a big rosette on him saying, "So does Munster, Leinster and Connacht," which kind of summed up the various religious bigotries of having a sectarian Protestant state one side of the border and a sectarian Catholic state on the other side of the border. So I think things have moved on from that. I think it's more difficult for the no side this time around to be overtly religious or to be overtly bigoted in a way that was happening then. So I'm quite pleased with the way that things have moved on. But again, you've got to remember, divorce was only carried by less than 1% of the vote. Yeah. So we really can't be complacent about this at all.
Can I just quickly ask something? Going back to the the question from Spencer to do with the Scottish independence referendum and this referendum that's going on in Ireland. What you often find, it seems, in politics, when you have these big referendums that affect the populace on a massive scale, everybody feels they have an opinion about it, wants to put their voice out there about it and vote on it. The populace becomes incredibly politicized, and that has a knock-on effect to things like voter turnout at upcoming elections. For instance, the Scottish independence referendum led to a voter turnout in average on Scotland of over about 70%, wasn't it?
It was election. 70% last week.
Do you see this referendum in Ireland having the same kind of knock-on effect with politicising the populace and having a knock-on effect for other elections?
Well, there's certainly been a lot more. So in terms of canvasses, which is something that I can judge by, there's a lot of people who have never canvassed before coming out to canvass on this on the yes side. There was in the area of Dublin that I live in, the canvasses that have been taking place started off relatively small and then ended up with a lot more people joining in, to the extent that last Friday's canvass ended up with in the constituency that I live in, ended up with over 100 people turning up to canvass, most of whom had never been involved in politics before, most of them had never knocked on the door for anything like that before, and ended up doing more streets on that night than had been initially planned to do over 3 nights. So there's certainly, there are a lot of people coming out that haven't been coming out before. Now, it's kind of difficult to tell whether this would translate into, votes at elections here, because it's kind of different here. Like the parallel in Scotland was much more direct in that the referendum was about Scottish nationalism effectively, and the election had the Scottish Nationalist Party running. So it wouldn't be as direct a parallel here in that you would have people who are coming out on a particular issue, and whether there are parties that would map directly onto those particular issues is different. There's one thing that I find fascinating, by the way, about the Scottish referendum, which I'd be interested to hear your views on this, because in Ireland, typically speaking, the Irish nationalists tend to support the Scottish nationalists. That's an oversimplification, and the Irish unionists tend to oppose the Scottish nationalists. But philosophically, in terms of political philosophy, it should almost be the other way around, in that the Irish nationalist position is that the island is the natural unit of self-determination, and that just because there's a majority in one part of the island doesn't mean that they are, should have a separate jurisdiction for themselves. And whereas the Scottish nationalist position is actually quite close to the Irish unionist position, which is that the island of Britain is not the natural unit of self-determination, and that the fact that there is a majority in a section of the island does mean that they should be able to separate from the rest of the island. So it's just, I mean, obviously there's other issues as well involved in it, but it's an interesting political, philosophical conundrum that the Irish nationalists seem to support the Scottish nationalists, possibly on the basis of a shared feeling towards England rather than any particular philosophical implications.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think I mean, it used to, I mean, I'll openly admit, years ago, probably the SNP and that, there was, in the 80s, there was a distinct, a very vocal anti-English minority in the parliament. But I think when Alex Salmond took over, he kind of he really overhauled, well, I mean, I hate to use this, but it was like when Tony Blair took over Labour and he just kind of overhauled the party, modernised it. Yeah.
The other thing you have there as well, of course, which, I mean, we have our problems here with our election system causing difficulties, but the first past the post system does distort the elections generally, and in that you're kind of penalised for having your support spread around the country, and you gain from having your support very strong in some parts of the country, and small to non-existent in other parts. Whether that be this, I mean, most obviously with the Scottish nationalists for obvious reasons, but also with Labour and the Tories and the Liberal Democrats and the UKIP, of course, this time around.
Yeah. All right, Kitcher Ziller, do you want to use?
There was another question in the chat room saying they're concerned about what effect a no vote might have on the mental health of young LGBTQ people in Ireland. A lot are saying they will consider leaving the country if it doesn't pass. Is there anything you can say to elucidate on this matter? Well,
just make sure you go out and vote. Make sure you bring people out to vote. I do agree with that. I think it would be. I mean, I don't like to melodramatize things, but I do think it would be pretty close to a disaster in the short term if this vote is defeated. Not merely because of the point you make, which is a very important one, and I know that the LGBT helplines have been trying to increase resources, even coming up to the referendum, never mind after the referendum, to try to deal with those extra stresses. But it would also be, like, one way or another, it's going to be a very significant statement about what type of Ireland we live in. And, we still do have what was an untrammeled Catholic sectarian state gradually being pushed back to what is now effectively a pluralist state, but still with Catholic laws. And if those Catholic laws are upheld by the population, that could, I think you're right, that would be significantly distressful for individual people, and particularly damaging for the progress that we have made in trying to get a more compassionate and pluralist society overall.
Yep, I think this is Spencer again asking, how much further to the right do you think the church will lurch in the event of a yes vote?
I'm not sure that they've that much of a policy, to be honest. I think they're just reacting from event to event, like the moral authority that they used to have before before a combination of just the move towards secularism anyway, and the fact that they were exposed as covering up the rape of children on a wide-scale basis, has meant that they're kind of more cautious about even articulating the policies that they're articulating. So they're trying to be more subtle. Even Dermot Martin, who's the Archbishop of Dublin, he has said that he is voting no, but he's almost creating the impression that he doesn't really want to vote no, but he has to vote no, and he feels uncomfortable voting no, and that's the way they're trying to put across the official line. What's probably stronger in terms of what you're talking about are organisations like the Iona Institute and some of these other kind of freelance, more conservative Catholic organisations. They're certainly articulating those type of attitudes much more overtly than the Catholic Church officially is.
And do you think these religious groups are doing more damage, like the Iona Institute? Are they doing more damage to the No campaign than actual benefit?
Well, we'll know in a week's time. I mean, it's easy for us to say they are, because to us their arguments are both incorrect and ludicrous. But there are people to whom they sound correct and sensible. So I mean, whether they're doing harm or not, we'll only find out when the vote happens.
I know when watching the debate on prime time, and I think it was on the Late Late Show, that there was a line that kept on coming up, that mothers and fathers have a right to their biological children, or children have the right to their biological mothers and fathers. I mean, no idea where this idea is coming from, or what they're trying to put forward. Did you catch that by any chance in these debates?
Yeah, well, yeah, they are using that. But I mean, it doesn't make sense from a number of reasons. First of all of those arguments, if you do take those arguments seriously, then they're arguments against marriage, not against marriage equality, because heterosexual couples are far more likely to have surrogate children than are gay couples. The most surrogacy is from what would be considered traditional heterosexual couples who want to have a child in order to be the perfect traditional heterosexual couple. So I mean, if your argument is that people being allowed to marry will encourage surrogacy, then that's an argument against heterosexual marriage just as much as it's an argument against marriage equality for gay people. The other aspect of that, which I find very strange, is the aspect saying that you're denying a surrogate child the right to their parent. I mean, the surrogate child, I mean, I don't want to sound too clinical about this, but the surrogate child isn't going to exist unless there is a decision to have a surrogate child. It's not as if there's a load of surrogate childs wandering around looking for their parents. You know, I mean, they only come into being if there is a decision to have a surrogate child. So you're giving a surrogate child life, which is what I thought these people were supposed to be supporting in their pro-life incarnations.
Yeah, because that would also work as just an argument against adoption in general. Yeah,
almost all of their arguments
could
apply equally to heterosexual couples. So in effect, they should be arguing against marriage.
Just full stop.
That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
So
there's another interesting thing just recently, by the way, just this week, which is that the Accord, which is the Catholic marriage guidance agency that organises these pre-marriage courses for Catholic couples, has had its funding cut recently, and for those courses, and they're complaining about that. They're saying that they shouldn't have that funding cut. Yeah, I mean, they're still funded for other things, like, you know, going into schools and teaching children about the Catholic position on marriage. But there's this sort of background thing in Ireland whereby Catholic institutions by default have this relationship with the state where they have this privilege of being funded for promoting their own particular religious beliefs in a way that other religions aren't. I mean, there's over 150 different religious groups registered with the Irish state under the Civil Registration Act for solemnising marriages. And under the Irish Constitution, the state is not allowed to discriminate between religions, otherwise that would be an endowment of a particular religion. And yet they still do so with regards to giving privilege to the Catholic Church and sometimes the mainstream Protestant churches over the minority religions, of which there are many in Ireland.
Okay, I think we can move. There was another referendum you wanted to talk about, so I'll let you kind of give the audience the background to this other one you were wanting to discuss.
Yeah, there are two referendums coming up this week. The second one, which most people have forgotten about, is a referendum to reduce the age by which you can become president, which is currently 35. The Constitution says that every citizen who has reached his 35th year of age is eligible for election to the office of president, and they want to change that to everyone's reached the age of 21 years. Now, on the face of it, that might sound very democratic, and that you're increasing the number of people that can run for president, and it may sound also trivial in that it's probably not the most pressing issue that Ireland is facing at the moment. But there is an issue underneath it which is causing Atheist Ireland to canvass against this referendum. And that is that also in the same article in the Constitution is a religious oath that the president has to take in order to take office. The president has to swear in the presence of Almighty God and has to ask this God to direct and sustain him or her in their work as president. Now, the effect of that religious oath is, and they are there for other positions as well, judges, Taoiseach, Taoiseach, etc. But the effect of that oath is to prevent conscientious atheists from taking the position of president. You would see that instantly if the oath was that you had to, deny that there was a God. People would realise that's obviously inappropriate to expect people who believe in God to deny that there's a God. Now, the government has been told repeatedly by bodies up to and including the United Nations Human Rights Committee that this religious oath breaches the human rights of atheists in Ireland. It breaches the right of freedom of conscience and belief. It breaches the right of equality before the law. It breaches the right of freedom from discrimination. And these are fundamental human rights. The government has not said that it disagrees with changing it. It has only said, the only excuse that is given for not changing it is that it's not a priority to change the constitutional position of the president. There are other more pressing issues. Yet here they are now putting forward a referendum to change the very article in which contains that oath as well, and to change it in a way that retains this religious discrimination that breaches human rights, and just changes the age, and in effect increases the number of atheists that will be discriminated against, because now atheists from the age of 21 to 35 will also be discriminated against on the grounds of their beliefs if this referendum is passed. And the way to look at it, I think, is, because that sounds very convoluted and it can be difficult to convey in a snappy way. But hypothetically, if you imagined, if the Constitution currently said that in order to be president, you have to be 35 and you can't be a Jew, and if they propose to change it to you have to be 21 and you still can't be a Jew, people would immediately realise that that's not an appropriate change to make to the Constitution. And so on that basis, Atheist Ireland is opposing the second referendum and asking people to vote against it.
All right, Pumpkin, are you there?
Yep.
All right, well, you're on with Mick, so as always, we get the newcomer on the spot, so feel free to ask any questions.
I know you were talking earlier about the yes and no vote in terms to gay marriage, but have you noticed any kind of increase of support coming from other areas of the country, even England, Scotland, Wales and all?
Sorry, support for what?
Support for the yes campaigners for gay marriage.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the most positive campaigns I've ever been involved in, the Yes campaign. It's a very cheerful campaign. It's a very optimistic campaign, possibly too optimistic for its own good, because as I said, there's a kind of a toughness that you need in referendum campaigns. But yeah, I think it has become unacceptable, socially unacceptable, to overtly discriminate against gay people. And that has helped the campaign greatly. But what it might be doing is it might be just masking a larger no vote than seems to be the case. Just as in the UK elections, there was clearly a soft Tory vote that didn't articulate itself through the opinion polls. So it's hard to tell, but there's a lot of support from throughout the country. Now, there's also support from abroad, as you mentioned, but there's another issue here with regard to the referendum, which is the Standards and Public Office Commission has now started to remind people that of the funding restrictions for promoting political causes in Ireland, and you cannot receive funding from abroad unless it's from an Irish citizen abroad. And as part of that, I mean, Atheist Ireland is registered with the Standards and Public Office Commission as a lobbying body which puts us under those restrictions. But the Iona Institute initially refused to register with the Standards and Public Office Commission, and after some pressure and some questions to the Standards and Public Office Commission by Atheist Ireland, the Iona Institute has now registered. So that will put them under the same restrictions, that they cannot receive funds from abroad to campaign for political purposes in Ireland.
So up until recently, they were able to screw the system with a loophole.
Well, effectively, they said that they didn't have to register. The conditions for registering is that you have to be promoting a political cause and you have to have received a donation of over €100 for political purposes. Now, initially they said that this hadn't happened. Then, after a bit of pressure from us and others, they said, yes, okay, we do need to register. So either to put it diplomatically, either they got their first donation of €100 very recently, or alternatively, they didn't realise the rules that they had to abide by and have only realised that recently. But one way or another, they have now registered, albeit under pressure, and that's a positive sign.
Anything else, Pumpkin?
Nothing jumps out at me at the moment, but I'm sure something will pop up.
I was just going to say, with this referendum and the other one, do you think this could be the start towards, well, when we had you on the first time, it was obviously regarding the abortion laws were a big topic, and then do you think this could be maybe the start of the shift towards a referendum on that as well? Or would that be done with a referendum?
I'd almost put that more pessimistically. I would say that if this is defeated, it will be almost impossible to have an early referendum on abortion.
Yeah.
The politicians will just run for cover if this is defeated, and just won't put the abortion question before the people. If the referendum is carried, I think it's just part of a process. I don't think it's particularly, the start. I think that again, it's almost going back to the 80s, when you had, in terms of gay rights, when you had the killing of Declan Flynn in Fairview Park. You also had, back in the 80s, the original pro-life referendum. Like it was that was probably the height of Catholic bigotry and homophobia in Ireland, being as overt as it was then. Back then, I was just looking recently on YouTube at some of the television debates from the original pro-life referendum back in the 1980s, and there were people there who are obviously pro-abortion, who were pretty solid pro-abortion feminist campaigners, who back then were felt unable to even say that they support abortion. That they had to say that they weren't supporting abortion. They were just arguing that this referendum won't reduce the number of abortions and shouldn't be put into the Constitution on that basis. So ironically enough, I think probably around then, when that referendum came in with regard to abortion, it started the process of, how will I put it? It started the process of normalising discussion of abortion in a way that wasn't the case before the first pro-life referendum. And I think that's been happening ever since then. So I don't think this is going to be the start of something, but I think it's either going to enable the process to continue if the referendum is carried, or be a severe retardation of the process if the referendum is lost.
Is it just still such a hot button issue in Ireland, abortion?
Yeah, but it's kind of almost like a pretend hot button issue, because when people, even those who say that they're against abortion, if it's a member of their own family needs an abortion, they'll go to England and they'll have an abortion. If they genuinely believed that abortion was murdering children, they would be taking much stricter measures than they are at the moment. They would be stopping children from, or stopping pregnant women from leaving the country, as indeed did happen. When that pregnant, raped teenager had an injunction taken out against her in the 1990s. I mean, that's what you would be doing if you genuinely believed it. I think it's just symbolic for them. I think it's a kind of touchstone issue for this Holy Catholic Ireland image that they like to portray, and that they realise that they're not actually stopping abortion, they're just making a political point.
Yeah.
Although I would add to that in practice they are stopping abortion for women who are either too poor or too ill, or whose perhaps whose refugee status makes it impossible for them to travel to England for an abortion. So they are causing genuine problems for women who cannot avail of the option of travelling to England for an abortion.
Yeah, because, well, the other thing is, I always feel if they were consistent about this being murdering children, they would want women who get abortions to be put in jail, surely. They would want
exactly.
to charge for
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Don't go giving them ideas.
Okay. I'm just looking in the chat. There are a couple of questions that come in that I just wanted to try and put to you. The first is, considering the broad Western support for gender equality, Ireland would be an anomaly in the event of a no vote in this referendum. Do you think there's going to be any commercial impact through that if it happens?
Well, no, I don't think, actually, I'm not sure that we will be an anomaly. I mean, the gay marriage, it's not as widespread as we would like it to be around the world, and even in the developed world. You know, in America, it depends on the state. Even where it has been brought in, it's brought in by legislation rather than by popular vote. And my understanding is that if the referendum is passed, that Ireland will be the first country that has brought in marriage equality by popular vote as opposed to by legislation. So I mean, we could be trendsetters rather than on the other end of the spectrum if the referendum is carried. But I think the difficulty is if it's not carried, it's you know, yeah, there is that symbolism about it, and it would be because Ireland traditionally has the reputation of being a sectarian Catholic state. It would reinforce that, and it would reinforce that image internationally. I can't see people taking commercial position. I mean, well, maybe there may be. I mean, there are in America. There are some corporations that will take positions where they won't deal with people who discriminate against gay people, and there are some of those companies who are present in Ireland. So I mean, you never know. That might be something that might arise if the referendum is defeated. But I haven't heard the argument made by anybody that they will be pulling out of commercial positions in Ireland dependent on the results of the referendum.
Okay. The other question that came through was again by the same person. I think, is that Spencer? I think.
Yeah, I think it is.
Is asking, will this be a watershed moment for Ireland? Will this accelerate the declining influence of the church? And to them, even though most of Europe have embraced the discourse, eyes are firmly fixed on Ireland symbolically. This seems to be a massive thing.
Yeah, I mean, when we go abroad as Atheist Ireland to the United Nations or to the OSCE or to the Council of Europe, lobbying on various human rights issues, and we introduce ourselves as being from Atheist Ireland, the reaction we get is almost as if we have introduced ourselves as the Vatican atheists. I mean, people just don't register the idea of there being an atheist organisation in Ireland, and so yeah, so we do have that position where changes in Ireland have a greater symbolic value internationally than changes in other countries. Probably disproportionately, because as I say, I think we have moved on. I don't think that we are the same Catholic nation as we used to be, but we do still have the Catholic laws. You know, we do still have the Catholic Church running 90% of our primary schools and being allowed to discriminate on the grounds of religion while proselytizing to children of non-religious families. We still have the presidential oath, which is religious. We still have oaths for judges and members of the Council of State, which includes Prime Minister, that are religious, that prevents atheists from taking up those positions. We still have overt exemptions from our equality laws that allow religious organisations, mostly Catholic, to discriminate on the grounds of religion. We still have abortion being illegal. We still have, we still don't have gay marriage yet. So there's still a range of issues that still reflect the Ireland of maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that need to be changed. And I think the difficulty in changing those is that a lot of younger people in particular are just ignoring the Catholic Church rather than trying to change the effect that they've had on our laws and are not getting involved in politics. And so the politicians will still keep those laws that reflect the sort of older Ireland, and that then reinforces what you're talking about, which is the view internationally that Ireland is still more of a Catholic country than it is in reality.
Cool. Cheers. Yes, I think that does seem to be quite a well. I can imagine, as you say, going around and introducing yourself as, you know, from being from Atheist Ireland, you probably would get one of two looks back. One being, you know, somebody's just seen a pink unicorn, and the other being one of utter sympathy for you.
Yeah.
Do you actually find that? Do you find when you go to these places, like say the Amazing Meeting or something, and you introduce yourself as Atheist Ireland, that people just almost look on you with pity and go, "Oh, I'm so sorry"?
Yeah, and it's actually, when we say pink uniform, maybe we might introduce the concept of the green green unicorn to represent Atheist Ireland. But yeah, it is, and as you say, it's two things that they're either. Well, now one of the things that we do find as well is it does tend to bring out into the open some people who are atheists and who, you know, even in Eastern European, or not Eastern European countries, but in several European countries who are concerned with these issues, but in their own countries that it can be difficult as well. And having a group from Atheist Ireland does give them a little bit of encouragement that even in a country with as strong a Catholic reputation as Ireland, that there is an active organisation. And we do try to be active. We do try to engage in mainstream lobbying. You know, at the moment we're in a range of meetings with the representatives of each of the political parties in Ireland who are preparing their election manifestos for the next election. Next month we're going over to the United Nations in Geneva, where Ireland is being questioned about its breaches of human rights under the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We were over last year for the same process under the civil and political rights questioning. And so we are trying to both normalise at a very minimal level the use of the word atheist, and at a maximal level the involvement of atheists and secularists in the political dialogue. And it is having a gradual impact both at home and internationally.
Congratulations there. Going back just quickly to the referendum, what do you think is if I can ask this, what is the dirtiest tactic you've seen used in the campaign for the referendum so far?
Well, all of this, what's the dirtiest? It's a combination. All this, there's this stuff about surrogacy, obviously, you know, which and adoption, which is the whole this argument about children. Now, it's dirty for two reasons. One, it's not true, and secondly, like there were posters around Dublin saying you know, child deserves the love of their mother and father, and a photograph of two parents presumably kissing a child on either cheek. But irrespective of the referendum argument, I mean, what message is that sending to all of the single parents in Ireland? You know, all of the adopted children in Ireland, all of the children of existing gay relationships in Ireland. I mean, they're quite happy to sacrifice the feelings of existing children who are living in families that aren't the same as their ideal families, in order to make these cheap political points about hypothetical children that don't even exist. So it's but that's typical of them. I mean, we do get used to that.
Fair enough.
Yeah. There's one thing, like the last time, this is just a catch-up. The blasphemy referendum, was there going to be a referendum on that, or there was going to be some change? Yeah. There was a bit of activity there which seems to have died down again.
Yeah, well, no, it hasn't died down. I mean, we're still pushing them on it. I mean, realistically, we're not going to get it this side of an election, but we're keeping it on the agenda, and we're preventing it from slipping down the agenda. Realistically, at the moment, we're approaching an election, and the government isn't going to do anything even remotely controversial until after the next election. So all that we can do is keep it on the agenda. We raised it at a meeting with the Taoiseach in February. We had a meeting with the Taoiseach and the Minister for Education and various senior civil servants, which was the first time ever that an atheist advocacy group has ever met a Prime Minister in Ireland. It was meant to last for an hour. It lasted for 2.5 hours. It was a very productive meeting in terms of conveying a lot of information that they simply weren't aware of, both about atheism itself and about how atheists are discriminated against in Ireland. And we're, you know, so we're quite optimistic that in the medium term, you know, without being just wildly optimistic about what can be done immediately, that things are moving in the right direction, that we are placing atheism and secularism, you know, to the forefront of political discourse in a way that simply wasn't the case, you know, 8 years ago before we were founded. Yeah,
because I'm trying to remember the current blasphemy. Is it like a €25,000 fine or something? Is it
€25,000 fine? If you, it's a kind of convoluted law. You have to say or do something that's grossly offensive or abusive with relation to matters that are held sacred by any religion, thus causing outrage among a substantial number of adherents of that religion. It's terrible that I actually know that off by heart, but that's the law, and it's a ridiculous law for a number of reasons. The most dangerous of which is that the first test of whether something is blasphemous or not is that it causes outrage amongst a substantial number of adherents of the religion concerned, and in today's world, with Islam in particular, prone to finding people that can show outrage at the drop of a hat or the drop of a cartoon. There's it's quite irresponsible to be incentivizing the showing of outrage as the first step in implementing a law. We should be encouraging people to behave more responsibly and proportionately when somebody says something that they disagree with, rather than encouraging them to show outrage in order to have a law implemented.
Yeah, I suppose that's the real danger. Is not only are you basing the first testimony on something that's completely subjective anyway. What outrages one person means nothing to someone else, and how do you really measure how outraged somebody is, and if it really matters? But the danger that you're going to set a precedent so that the more outraged you visibly are, the more chance you've got of the other person being prosecuted. So in effect, the more damage you try and do to the person who's committing blasphemy in your eyes, the more right you have to see the person prosecuted.
Yeah, you can imagine somebody going to the police and saying, I've got this publication here and I find it blasphemous, it offends my sensibilities, and the guard saying to them, "Oh, I'm afraid you don't seem outraged enough to me." You'll have to not only be outraged, but you'll have to get a substantial number of people to be outraged, and then maybe we can do something about it. I mean, it's completely irresponsible. The other dangerous thing about it is that it's the Irish blasphemy law has been cited at the United Nations by Pakistan on behalf of the Organisation of Islamic States at the United Nations, as part of supporting their argument that there should be blasphemy laws throughout the world, that defamation of Islam should be a crime, that Islamophobia should be a crime. I mean, they invent all of this sort of moving target of definitions of what they're talking about, but essentially criticism of Islam under various guises. They want to be closed down. And they're using the existence of the Irish blasphemy law to say, well, look, here's a Western democracy in the 21st century passing a law against blasphemy. There's nothing unusual about what we're doing. There's nothing wrong with what we're doing. And Western states who are trying to stop us are being hypocritical. So I mean, it's dangerous within Ireland, and it's dangerous for the international community because it incentivizes outrage in Ireland, and it incentivizes this attempt to spread Islamic laws about blasphemy internationally.
Even if it isn't used that much in Ireland, it can be used to promote it in a country where it would be used to a very terrifying degree.
Exactly, and where people are either at best locked up or at worst hacked to death for saying things that people find offensive.
Yeah, I was going to say, has there been any attempt by anyone to bring a prosecution with it? Has there been any? Have you heard of it?
No, there hasn't yet. I mean, the government. I'm pretty sure the government, because bear in mind the current government isn't the government that brought in that law. So I mean, the current government, I'm sure, would be delighted if it could just magically go away. They don't want to have prosecutions on the basis of it. But the difficulty is, and if we go back to the abortion case for a second, and if you look at when the original abortion referendum was passed, and then you had everyone assumed when the original abortion referendum was passed that it would not be used to prevent women from travelling to England. And then you had that raped teenage girl, the 14-year-old girl, whose parents wanted to bring her to England for an abortion, and they said, well, look, they asked the guards, can we use the DNA from the fetus as part of the legal case against the alleged rapist? And the response of the state was to take an injunction against that girl to prevent her from travelling to England. Now, that resulted in another referendum, because there was public outrage, another referendum that gave women the right to travel abroad. Again, a bizarre situation where we have to have a referendum to allow women to travel abroad in our country. But the relevance of that to the current situation is, even if you assume that it won't be implemented or that it's unlikely to be implemented. You can never tell when you get these kind of pseudo quasi-religious clauses put into your law. You can never tell when somebody's going to decide that their conscience is telling them that they have to implement it because the creator of the universe wants them to, and so it just might happen. You just can't tell.
And it's also the fact that it can be used to severely censor free speech. Like if there is laws, as you've mentioned many times, like Catholic laws that have been put forward, if you're trying to campaign against them, someone can say, oh, well, your views on this law deeply offend me. Here's a fine, lock him up. Yeah,
or what's even more insidious is you'll get media outlets, particularly for live interviews, saying, don't mention this. It's not that we disagree with you, but we just can't afford to take the risk of being fined. And so it ends up not even reaching the stage of possibly being tested, because there's a self-censorship that comes into it because a media outlet just doesn't want to get entangled in a legal case that might cost them €25,000 when it's just easier to say, no, just don't talk about that. We'll talk about something softer.
I just want to come back. You mentioned again the abortion issue and women going abroad. Just so it's the practicalities of that, did that effectively mean that if a woman was pregnant, she was not allowed to travel abroad?
Well, that's what was the case with regard to the what became known as the X case. There was an injunction taken against a raped, pregnant 14-year-old girl. Now, in practical terms, you can't enforce that indiscriminately, because how would you do it? Although we have a similar case here with regard to a related issue, which is the right to die, where it's illegal in Ireland. It's another campaign that I'm involved in personally, because my wife, when she was dying of cancer, had made preparations to be able to take her own life, and it's legal in Ireland to take your own life. It's not legal to help somebody to take your own life. And we had a case in the courts just recently in Ireland where a woman had been planning to go to Switzerland to where it's legal to take her own life, to Dignitas. And when a friend of hers was buying the airplane tickets, she was buying a return ticket for herself and a single ticket for the woman that was planning to end her own life. And the travel agent got the police involved. And the woman was told that if you go away and one of you comes back, you can be charged with assisting somebody to commit suicide. And so they didn't go abroad. The woman did commit suicide anyway, and the woman that had initially helped her was taken to court just a few weeks ago, and fortunately was found guilty. But again, so that there have been cases in that of the state effectively stopping somebody from travelling abroad to avail of services that are lawful in another jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think
I'm a bit speechless by all that.
Yeah, look. The difficulty is, the big split in these issues is between people who try to approach ethics on the basis of minimizing harm and on the basis of compassion and empathy and reciprocity and cooperation and fairness and justice on the one hand, and people who approach ethics on the basis of imposing rules that they think creator of the universe has told them to impose on other people, and they'll all play out in the same way. In all of these things, it's pretty obvious what the compassionate thing to do is, and it's pretty obvious that it is religious beliefs that are corrupting the attempts to be compassionate by saying it doesn't matter if that's the compassionate thing to do. You have to do this because it's written down in a book somewhere. It's even at its most extreme in the Quran. There's a clause in the Quran that says that you have to lash adulterers 100 times each, and don't let your compassion stop you from doing it. And also it has to be done in public. And presumably these added don't let your compassion stop you and do it in public were added in because there were people who were trying to avoid carrying out these punishments because they were extreme and they were clearly unethical. And that's unfortunately where religion is not only not good, but is actually actively harmful in that it corrupts the sort of natural morality that we would otherwise be using to govern ourselves.
Yeah, because why allow someone the chance to die with dignity in a way they can choose when Bible says no, go to jail?
Yeah. and again, but it's even worse than that. It's this kind of thing that if it happens without them knowing about it, they're not really that fussed. But once they officially know, they have to make a big deal about it.
It's probably onto another subject, and you said the secular education campaign that you guys are heading on. And how's that going? Is there any progress there, or what's the state of affairs?
It's an ongoing problem. Obviously, I mean the Catholic Church runs over 90% of our primary schools. It's allowed to run them on the basis of Catholic teaching. It's allowed to discriminate against teachers. It's allowed to discriminate against pupils. The government is trying to address it by bringing in laws that will minimise the discrimination in their view, but we're saying that doesn't go far enough and in fact reinforces discrimination. I'll give you two examples. They're trying to bring in a bill that's saying that you can't, a school can't discriminate against a teacher because they're gay. Now that's obviously progress. But in practice what it's saying is you can still discriminate against them for being an atheist, as long as you don't abuse your right to discriminate against them because they're an atheist to also discriminate against them because they're gay. So it seems like progress, but actually it's reinforcing the discrimination. The second bill that they're trying to bring in at the moment, which is doing the same thing, is they're saying that they're bringing in a bill that will reduce discrimination in access to schools. But they're still keeping the religious discrimination. They're removing all other discrimination, keeping the religious discrimination. They describe it in one of the great political euphemisms in the explanatory memorandum to the bill as removing all discrimination apart from lawful oversubscription criteria. That's the euphemism they use for continuing with religious discrimination, where you can, where one parent who was at our meeting with the Taoiseach and the Minister for Education told the Taoiseach and the Minister for Education, I was trying to get my child into the local school, which happens to be a Catholic school, and I was told, your child is a Category 2 boy, which means that he's not a Catholic. We will give priority to all of the Category 1 boys, and then if there are any spaces left, we'll come back to you about your Category 2 boy. And the Minister for Education said at that meeting, I apologise for that, that you should never be told that your child is a Category 2 boy, and yet they are still in this legislation that will retain that religious discrimination. So to answer your question, we're certainly at a stage now where people are far more aware of the nature of the discrimination than they were before we started this campaign. We're not yet at a stage where it's being implemented, and we're running into a further difficulty, which is they are now claiming that even with the United Nations Human Rights Committee telling them that they're breaching our rights in schools, they're now claiming that there's a constitutional difficulty with bringing in equality, religious equality in schools, and so we might be down the road to another referendum. Whenever we get round to that part of the queue. But I think what might short circuit it is we might end up, if there is a parent willing to do so, is to take a court case to the European Court of Human Rights. And there's another issue which is too complicated for me to go into now, but that might enable us to take a court directly to Europe rather than having to exhaust domestic remedies first. Yeah,
because was there not also in that meeting, was that not the person that wouldn't let themselves be identified?
That's right. Well, there were two people there. We brought a parent and a teacher and a student to give first-hand accounts to the Taoiseach and the Minister for Education about the discrimination they faced. And normally at those meetings, like, you'll have a group photograph with the Taoiseach whenever there's a meeting like that happening. But for our group photograph, we had to say, well, look, actually there are two people here, the teacher and the pupil, who will have to stand out of this photograph because they are legitimately concerned that if it is known that they met the Taoiseach Minister for Education to raise these issues, that they could face further discrimination, harassment in their schools, and the Taoiseach Minister for Education wouldn't even be in a position to say, well, we can stop that happening, because the schools are allowed to discriminate against them under the law. So it's shocking, really, when you think about that. I mean, I don't want to sort of be bigging up politicians beyond their place in society, but you would think in a normal society that for a teacher, or certainly for a schoolgirl, to be meeting the Prime Minister of their country, would be a proud moment, and something that they could, be proud to tell their family and friends about, and indeed talk about in school. But here you can't. If you're an atheist, you have to hide the fact that you have met the Prime Minister of your country.
Yeah, well,
Grief.
we kind of, you know, Sarah, obviously, Sarah May, who used to do our blog for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, she had to eventually stop blogging because people in her school found out about the blog. That's why she had to stop suddenly for us, because she said...
Yeah, I mean, it's all around the country.
Yeah.
There are so many examples of this, and it's just very, very difficult to address until we eventually get the laws changed. And to be honest, I think we will get the laws changed. You know, I mean, look, we're living in an era since the collapse, say, of the Berlin Wall, or the fall of apartheid, or the, you know, the collapse of the communist regime in Eastern Europe. I mean, you know, we're living in an age where you can get pretty big changes pretty suddenly when they do happen. And I don't think we're going to cause the changes to happen. I think something else will happen within society that will trigger the changes. But when that thing happens, all of the work that we have been doing up to now will then become retrospectively useful and will help to shape the changes that will happen. And I think when they do happen, that they'll happen pretty quickly.
Just
there,
quickly,
buy you a pint.
Cal put up a link to the repeal the Irish blasphemy law petition on the website that I think another guest was pointing towards. Now, obviously, you know, all of these things don't happen in a vacuum. When you have referendum in countries, there are people outside that country who have opinions on it and who can affect it in some way. What kind of with people who aren't in Ireland who post to this petition, do you think that those signatures have any weight on the Irish government? Do they listen to people who are outside Ireland?
They do, yeah. I mean, the Irish government typically, when you know, we're used to having laws passed here in Ireland that people just go, that's just Fianna Fáil being mad again or something like that. But when they do go abroad, they do like to pretend that they're responsible adults, and they do like to create the impression abroad that we are the modern pluralist democracy that our population probably is, but that our laws still aren't. So yeah, I do think that it will have an effect, that they are conscious of their reputation abroad. They're conscious of our reputation as a country that promotes human rights, and they're quite embarrassed when we have been repeatedly, and you know, since Atheist Ireland has been lobbying and briefing the United Nations Human Rights Committee on these issues, that we've been repeatedly told by the United Nations that you're breaching the human rights of your own citizens in a number of areas. There was one very significant thing as well, and this goes, you know, beyond Ireland to other countries as well that have signed up to various United Nations human rights treaties. When we were over in Geneva last year, when Ireland was being questioned under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Ireland was asked by the UN committee, why don't Irish women have abortion rights, not unlimited abortion rights, but abortion rights less restrictive than Ireland gives, in accordance with their rights under the UN treaties. And Ireland's response was, well, there's another clause that says the people have the right to express their political will, and so we have laws passed based on referendums, and that's why. And the United Nations Human Rights Committee told Ireland that's a completely unacceptable reason to deny people their human rights. That the whole point of human rights law is to protect individuals from the tyranny of the majority, and that you cannot deny people human rights on the basis of majority votes, either in Parliament or in referendums. And so there's a whole front opening up there whereby we can campaign on the basis of Ireland's human rights obligations. And if they're saying, well, we can't do this under the Constitution, then the question arises, well, is our Constitution then incompatible with our human rights obligations? And do we have to give up the credibility that we have abroad of being a signatory to major human rights treaties on the basis that we're one of the rogue nations whose constitutions won't let us enforce those treaties? So there's a range of international impacts that I think can be quite positive in the long run, and that stretch way beyond Ireland to other countries that have also signed up to those treaties.
I can't remember who it was said it, but just listening to what you were saying reminded me of a quote. The thing about human rights is you shouldn't actually be able to vote on them. Yep,
yeah. And another one that I like is the trouble with human rights, like equality, is that if you give equality to somebody, everybody will be looking for it.
Because some of the things we talk about, do they not actually go against the human rights, the European Charter of Human Rights, some of the things you've mentioned today.
Yeah, they do, and yes, they go against the European Covenant as well, and so yeah, so there are some areas. It's kind of complicated for a podcast, but there are some areas where the rights are enshrined in law domestically as well as being in the treaties, and where you can say, you know, you have to, even within Irish law, you're going to have to enforce these rights, and there are other rights where they're limited, where for example, some of the rights only apply to, or some of the obligations only apply to agents of the state. And so the Ireland has been arguing, for example, that that schools are not agents of the state, and therefore the schools, you know, don't have to implement the human rights standards because they're not the state. So it's complicated, but we're moving in the right direction. And even on that, there was a very useful case in the European Court of Human Rights recently, the Louise O'Keefe case, where Ireland made that argument about a girl, which is a woman now, but when she was a girl, she was abused in a Catholic school, and Ireland was saying, well, we're not responsible because we don't run the schools. And the European Court said, no, it doesn't matter that you don't run the school directly; you're still responsible for protecting the human rights of children within the schools. So again, it's quite complex, but we're on top of it, and we're continuing to highlight the issues.
I do find that it does seem to be that some of the Irish politicians seem to be trying to get away with carefully worded bullshit, and for many years have been. But now that you and others are taking them up to European Court, they're being called on it quite a bit, and they're being found completely lacking in any substance.
Yeah, and I think another part of that, which isn't down to us, it's just the way society is developing, is technology. You know, the fact that the information that you need to make these cases is now so available, and the fact that you can deal directly, either, you know, by email with these international bodies in a way that you mightn't have been able to, you know, 10 or 20 years ago. I think that's making a big difference. Even say, for example, when we're over in Geneva next month, when Ireland is being questioned, what we can do, based on last year, when we were at the same meeting under a different treaty, when Ireland is being questioned, and they give the kind of, you know, the pat answers that they have, that they'll assume that the United Nations Committee aren't aware of the background to, we're in a position, because we're in the room listening to that discussion, to directly in real time email the committee secretariat with counter arguments to what the Irish government is responding to. And they can, in real time, get that information and then say, well, actually, what's the story about this? So it's really useful in terms of equalising the power imbalance that used to be there between states and lobby groups. It's just, I'm finding it fascinating how technology is playing a part in the process.
I have a feeling the Secretariat is going to be loving you for doing that.
I know, yeah. Actually, no, they do. In fairness, now, when you look at the United Nations, a lot of people confuse the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is the political body, with the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which is the treaty monitoring body. And the treaty monitoring body is composed of independent experts who are actually very interested in getting information that will enable them to do their job as comprehensively as possible.
Oh no, I wasn't saying that sarcastically. I mean, the guy is probably, or woman, could be, will be reading all of these emails in real time, and will be like, thank you, thank you. Thank you. And you're dead. Yeah,
I'm getting very cynical in my old age now, and assuming that everybody that says that something good is good is being sarcastic.
Oh, don't worry. Wait, I'm only 19 and I'm already like that.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we've got 5 minutes left. So last questions from any of my co-panelists.
Anyone? And silence.
Yes.
I was thinking that I might have kind of hijacked quite a bit of this discussion, so I wanted to see if Kitch had anything to add in.
Yeah, Kitch, you can go last then.
Sure. I was going to ask, has the church tried to... actually, just go back to the referendum and deal with the issue of the church and education. Has the church tried to influence children or parents or teachers in this referendum?
Well, on the face of it, they're being more diplomatic and nuanced than they're used to being. On the face of it, they're trying to almost say, we want you to vote no, but we don't want to say that we want you to vote no. You know, so they're saying we're asking you to consider the what you're being asked to vote on, and we're asking you to look at church teaching. So they're not as belligerent about it as they used to be, but they're still getting the message across. And I think probably as it comes closer to it, I'd imagine today is Sunday, isn't it? I'd imagine that, you know, whatever sermons that they were giving at their churches today were probably fairly heavily weighted towards encouraging people to vote no. So they're still trying to push it, but they're not being as overt as they have been, because I think they kind of realise that it might be counterproductive for them to be seen to be as belligerent as they used to be.
And has the children's Catholic magazine Alive? I heard that had, I think it was last week or the week before, had something on the referendum, or at least some way dealing with it.
I didn't say that, but I mean, I consider that magazine to be a comic. I mean, it's almost like a religious version of The Onion.
There was one question that came off. Is there any, like I say, some countries have rules about what churches can say regarding politics. I take it is there any such restrictions in Ireland, like, you know,
No.
churches openly endorsing a party on the, you know, from the pulpit kind of thing?
Well, there's no. Well, they tend not to endorse parties typically, but there's no restriction on them promoting a political cause.
Okay.
Ironically enough, there is restrictions on secular groups who nominate marriage solemnizers from promoting political cause. There's the law on marriage solemnizing in Ireland discriminates against non-religious groups on a number of bases. One of which is that if you're a secular group and you're solemnizing marriages, like the Humanist Association, you have to sign up to a law that prevents you from promoting political cause. Yet religious groups who solemnize marriages, such as the Catholic Church, aren't under such a restriction. So that's another example of the religious privilege that the Catholic Church has in Ireland.
So do as I say, but not as I do scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And even what they say is subject to just random changing depending on what suits them at any given time.
Well, there is one of our guests is saying that there has been reports on Twitter today of people walking out on a mass in protest about what's been said from the pulpit. Okay,
well then that's as I suspected. Then I presume that they are urging people to vote no.
Yeah. All right, got 2 minutes left.
Quite good though that that's their congregation are walking out of the mass in protest at what the clergy are saying from the pulpit. Though that's quite promising.
I think that has to do, like, from family I have down south, after all of the child abuse scandals and all of the other bullshit that's been going on for years and years being brought to light, and in very harsh light, a lot of people are starting to question it.
Yeah,
and I think
been sort of how to put it. It would have been considered, you know, oh, we have to go to mass because it's the expected thing. But now people are sort of shaking themselves out of that and thinking, I don't agree with any of this.
Well, hopefully that'll happen, and hopefully it will go further. I mean, what I often wonder when I hear things like that is what somebody who is prepared to take the stand of standing up and walking out of a church during a sermon, you know, what are they doing in the church in the first place?
And I think also it's now that Ireland's a bit more progressed, you know, gay people can be, you know, you don't have to hide it as much as you did 20 years ago. That chances are a lot of people would know somebody who is gay, would have a cousin, a sister, a brother, a son or daughter, a grandson. And they're seeing that it's more personal to them, so they're not going to be easily influenced by the age-old arguments, those pretty much distractions and all that.
Yeah,
so
and it's also, that's complicated as well within the Catholic Church. You know, even within the clergy, because there is a kind of more liberal lobby group within the clergy as well. Is you got to remember that a lot of the clergy are gay as well. You know, so those tensions are playing themselves out within the Catholic Church as well as within society generally.
Okay, I think that's us coming up to time, so we'll start to wrap up. Zilla, your final thoughts?
Yeah, just that I hope all goes well in the referendum. I'm keeping fingers crossed, and we'll see what knock-on effect this has if the vote does go yes for the rest of kind of the secular movement in Ireland.
Kitch?
This is going to be quite a long week of campaigning. I'd say I can predict coming up ahead, and I just want to thank Vic for taking time out of his day to come here and talk about the referendum.
And Pumpkin?
When the referendum passes, I'll buy you a pint.
It's Thursday, isn't it, the actual vote?
Friday.
Friday. So will it be like Saturday morning you'll know the results, the outcome of it?
Probably not by exit polls, I'd say.
Okay. All right, and Mick, your final thoughts. Have you anything you want to say to anyone who's listening or watching right now?
Well, next Friday, I mean, just by coincidence, I'm going over to Germany next Friday for an International Atheist Conference in Cologne. I've rescheduled my going over so that I can vote before I go over on the day, and hopefully when I'm giving my talk there, I'll be able to announce that Ireland is the first country by popular vote to have legalised marriage equality. But if that happens, it's going to require people not only agreeing with it, but also coming out to vote and encouraging everybody that they know that it also supports a yes vote to come out and vote. And also it asks people to reject the presidential age referendum on the same grounds that it reinforces religious discrimination.
Okay, thank you very much, Mick, for taking the time out. As always, it's been a pleasure having you.
You're welcome. Always happy to help.
All right, and
cheers,
thank you everyone for tuning in and everyone who's listening in podcast land. And we'll be back very soon. I don't know. I think we're planning a follow-up to our show with Deland and Cole about the UK election and chewing over the results with him. So that's what's coming up soon. So everyone have a good rest of the weekend wherever you are.
Okay, cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
See you, everyone. Remember to get out and vote if you can.
You're right. It's looking relatively positive, but who knows in terms of the turnout on the day. Conservative voters in Ireland typically turn out in greater numbers proportionally than Liberal voters. So I'm certainly not taking anything for granted, but we're on the verge of a really significant change in how Ireland deals with the equality for gay and lesbian people.
Yeah, because we just had it passed in Scotland this year, and it's been quite interesting seeing the campaigns here. The No campaign. It's always quite interesting to hear what they seem to focus more. It was just the redefinition of marriage. Where I've seemed to notice in Ireland, it's the family and the children. That's the angle the No campaign seem to be going for a lot of the time. I think you've said it yourself. They seem to be more. It seems to be a referendum on surrogacy for them, but not actually marriage.
Yeah, now the positive side of that is that they don't feel comfortable in being as overtly homophobic as they might have been 30 years ago or 20 years ago. You know, back then, a campaign, if we had had one at that stage, would have been conducted by the No side on the basis of this is unnatural and this is against Catholic teaching. They're not comfortable making those overtly homophobic arguments now, so they are kind of reduced to scrabbling around at the bottom of the barrel for these strange arguments like surrogacy, adoption, which are nothing to do with the referendum. If this referendum is passed, all that will happen is the two people of the opposite sex or of the same sex will be able to marry each other. Any other laws about who can marry who will continue to be set out in legislation, and anything to do with adoption or surrogacy, which you know are the same for married couples or unmarried couples, for same-sex couples, for heterosexual couples, will still be the same. They won't be affected one way or another by this referendum.
Yeah, Zilla, do you have anything to ask?
Yeah, just right back at the start, you were talking about the incident 30 years ago, and you were talking about homosexuality and the law. Now, just to clarify, was it that homosexual acts were illegal up until then, or was it that homosexuality itself was illegal? Was it illegal to even just be homosexual?
Well, it was homosexual acts. I mean, in practical terms, I'm sure they would have liked to make homosexuality itself illegal, but in practice, you can't police people's desires or thoughts. But homosexual acts were illegal.
So does that mean that sodomy itself was illegal, which also would have had ramifications for heterosexual couples who practiced it?
To be honest, I'm not sure about that, what the situation was then about that. I know that David Norris's case, where he took the case on the basis of his right to private and family life, and that the state shouldn't be interfering in his private life. So that to a certain extent, that wouldn't depend on the sexuality of the people involved in terms of
Sorry, I'm late. I got roped into chauffeur duties at the last second.
Yep. So I think, well, seeing as you're the newcomer, we can really put you on the spot. Have you got a question for Mick?
Yeah, sure. I don't know what's been asked so far, so sorry if this is actually a repeat question. But what's the feeling in Ireland about the gay marriage? Is there any generational divide? Is there any regional divide?
Yeah, it's kind of what you'd expect. The urban areas and younger voters are more strongly supportive. There's a reasonable spread across political parties. Most of all the major political parties are supporting it. Now, that's not always a good thing in Ireland, because you'll get people who, for some reason, want to give the political parties a kicking, and hopefully won't choose this as their way of doing it. I think that the yes vote, which in the polls has been up around the sort of 70-75%, was down to 53% in the most recent poll, which is a significant drop. But it's still that's still taking don't knows. That's still without taking the don't knows into consideration. So it's 53, and I think 25 for no, and the rest are undecided. So it would still take quite a shift in support of the no vote for the referendum to be defeated, if you're just looking at the number of people that are supporting or opposing it. However, as in all elections and referenda, the big issue is who will physically come out on the day to vote. And unfortunately, in Ireland, there is a tendency for Conservative voters to come out in greater numbers than Liberal voters. So as I said earlier before you come on, I'm certainly not taking anything for granted, and I think it's going to take quite a lot of both canvassing in the last week, but also, more importantly, just encouraging people to physically come out and vote.
It's a very bizarre debate so far that's been going on. One side seems to be arguing for marriage equality, and the other side has just made up a debate and arguing that. I've heard arguments about surrogacy, adoption, all these different debate topics from the no side, but without actually addressing the gay marriage, or very little.
Yeah, and I mean, the Referendum Commission has made clear, that these issues are not relevant to the to the referendum, and that all of these issues like surrogacy and adoption, they're dealt with by legislation. They address gay couples and heterosexual couples equally in any case, and there is a new bill put through the door recently, private life.
Yeah, I just always find it quite interesting how they try and introduce these laws, against the homosexual community, and what implications they end up having for everybody else as well.
Well, I was out yesterday, or not yesterday, I was out on a couple of days ago in town with some people from the Socialist campaign who I met on the street, who were campaigning for the referendum. And as we were chatting, a woman came up opposing the referendum on the basis of anal sex being unhygienic. And when we pointed out to her that heterosexual couples also have anal sex, she just didn't seem that this didn't seem to register with it at all as a possibility. And she kind of entertainingly enough, she ended up literally in a variation of the no, I'm not listening to you, started just chanting at us, the anus is for pooping. the anus is for pooping, and she kind of got into quite a rhythm with this, and we realized before she did that there were other people just walking by on the street that didn't realize she was having a conversation with us about the referendum, and all that they saw was this lady standing there chanting, "The anus is for pooping, the anus is for pooping." So it's a kind of entertaining country for a referenda.
That does sound a little bit like the I don't know if it's apocryphal or real, but the story with Queen Victoria, who had lesbianism explained to her and just decided that lesbian sex couldn't happen, so therefore lesbianism didn't exist.
Yeah, it's I know, and even in the I mean, the Christian Bible seems to not to focus on lesbian sex either. But there's a great quote actually by David Norris. It's one of my favourite quotes from Irish politics, which is in the David Norris, for context, was the first openly gay member of the Irish legislature, a senator, an independent senator in Trinity College, or elected by the Trinity College constituency, and in the early 1990s, when the Catholic Church made one of their frequent statements to the effect that it's okay to discriminate against gay people in certain circumstances. And Archbishop Desmond Connell, who was at the time the Archbishop of Dublin, quite a conservative Catholic, agreed with this and endorsed that statement. And the media asked David Norris for a response to Archbishop Connell's statement that it's okay to discriminate against gay people. And to put David's comment in context, Archbishop Connell wrote his doctoral thesis partly on angels, which will give you an impression of the type of person that he is. And David's response was, well, this shows that Archbishop Connell may know a lot about angels, but he knows feck all about fairies.
That's a wonderful quote.
And we can welcome Kitch to the show.
Hi guys.
About family status and protecting children, which deals with all these issues in the best interest of the child, independently of whether the family concerned have gay couple or a heterosexual couple involved in it. So these are distractions, but as I was saying earlier before you came on, I think it's ironically in some ways a positive step that these distractions are being raised, because it shows that people are not as comfortable as being overtly homophobic and religious about their arguments as they might have been 30 or 20 years ago.
Kitch?
Yeah, sorry, kind of had to do a blank there. Yeah, even the on prime time, I can't remember who it was. He was in charge of the adoption services. Am I quite right? Came out and said that the marriage equality bill will not affect the adoption process whatsoever, and immediately the no side had just pretty much rubbished what he was saying without taking it into consideration, without even rubbishing what the child charities are saying, the children's charities are saying, without even taking a moment to consider, wait a minute, I might be wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want to be confused by facts, and they don't want other people to be confused by facts. I mean, look, the gist of it is, if the referendum is passed, the only change that there will be is that two people can get married regardless of their sex. Any other laws about who can marry who will continue to be set out in legislation. The constitutional status of marriage won't be changed at all. A marriage between two gay people will have the same status under the Constitution as a marriage between two heterosexual people, and married couples of any gender will be recognised as a family and will be entitled to the constitutional protection for families. Currently, although there are some protections laid out in the under civil partnership for gay couples, those protections aren't constitutionally protected, and this would put all families on the same constitutional footing.
I just want to come in with one question.
Sure.
Something I've heard a lot is a lot of the notes I say, well, you've got the civil unions, why do you want marriage? You know, it's just the same things. So is there a difference in the definition? I've never really, I've always backed equal, but what is the actual difference in a civil union and a...
Yeah, well, they say that as if I had one person saying it when I was canvassing, saying, yes, already have civil partnerships. And so I asked them, well, would you be happy with a civil partnership instead of a marriage? And they immediately went, well, that's not the point. But well, civil partnership, there's a few things about civil partnership. First of all, you can't be in a civil partnership if you're heterosexual. It has to be two people of the same.
Yeah. And hopefully it should come up. Just waiting for to see that it is broadcasting first.
I'm just trying to get it loaded up on the screen.
Yep, we're on the screen, so.
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Trolling with Logic. It's the 17th of May. I have lost all track of the dates with the events of the last few weeks in the UK with the election, but we'll quickly get into this. As you can see, if you've got a question tonight, the Skype details are down below on the screen. And just quickly introduce my quite depleted panel tonight. Zilla, how are you doing?
Oh, good. Yourself?
Yes, I'm doing very well. Just to quickly say, as you can see, the topic today is the upcoming marriage equality referendum, and we'll probably branch into a few other topics today. So welcoming back, he's been on the show a good few times, the chair of Atheist Ireland, written the hit play I, Kino, if I'm recalling this correctly. Kitch knows all of this stuff a lot better, but welcoming back, and always a pleasure to have you, Michael Nugent.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you back. So I think we'll just get into the main topic that probably everyone's going to be want to hear about is the marriage equality referendum. So can you give us a bit of a background to how things got to the way they are right now in Ireland?
Well, essentially, 30 years ago in Ireland, there was a man beaten to death in Fairview Park in Dublin for being gay by a group of people who openly said that they were queer bashing. And they received a suspended sentence after being found guilty, and they had a victory march back to Fairview from the court. It was an outrageous situation. And that triggered off a series of what were initially protest marches by the gay community in Ireland, which eventually sort of morphed into the current pride parades and a very strong lobby campaign by the gay community and indeed by people in the wider community for equality for gay people in Ireland. The main stepping stone to where we are now was the legalization of homosexuality, which was illegal until the early 1990s, when Senator David Norris took a court case to the European Court of Human Rights and forced the Irish government to change the law on that. And we've now astonishingly in the space of 30 years, which is a relatively short period of time in the overall evolution of a state, we're now reaching a state where we're on the verge of having marriage equality regardless of the sex of the married couple, which may come about next week if things